God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bi thina'ik. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Brothers, sisters and viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In a report from Ibn Abbas, he says that the Holy Prophet said, when it will be the day of judgment, there will be a call from a caller, and he will say, where is the best of all worshippers? Or in another translation, where is the beauty of the worshippers? Where is the adornment of the worshippers? And at that point, my son, Ali, son of Husayn, will rise and he will walk through the ranks. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight, we want to take a quick glance at a very important personality in our worldview, and more specifically, an important personality as it relates to the tragedy of Karbala. And this is the figure of Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn, the son of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, who is nicknamed al-Sajjad for the length, the duration of his sujood, and also nicknamed Zaynul Abideen for the constant state of worship that he was in, the beauty or the adornment of the worshippers. We're not trying to provide a full biography of the life of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. We can't do that in the short amount of time that we have. Of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. We're trying to concentrate on some glimpses of his life that will also allow us to better understand the events of Karbala. As we said, Karbala did not begin on the 10th of Muharram, nor did it end there. And so we're trying to look at his biography from that perspective, to see the role that he played as it relates to the events and the tragedy of Karbala. Once again, maybe a quick remark is that this is not based on, a full extensive study of history. We're relying on one version of history, the one that we have time to provide, and much more extensive studies would be required to go in depth in the personality of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam for a number of reasons, some of which we will mention today. Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn alayhi salam, according to the popular version of history, was born around the years 35 to 38 after Hijrah. Keeping in mind that the tragedy of Karbala was in year 61 after Hijrah, this would place him at around 23 to 25 years of age in the event of the tragedy of Karbala. And it would also place him, according to this version of history, as being the second of the sons of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, after Ali al-Akbar, the one nicknamed al-Akbar, who would be 2 to 3 years older than him, and who would have been in the events of the tragedy of Karbala around 26 to 28 years old. Again, one more area of research and study for history, those who are interested in history. Sheikh al-Mufid, for instance, considers Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam as the eldest of the sons of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. But the popular opinion today is that he is the second after Ali al-Akbar. And this is perhaps related in an indirect way to a topic that we're not going to delve into, but just to keep in mind, related to who becomes an imam. Entire sects in Islamic theology have built a belief around the idea that it can only be the eldest of the sons of an imam who can become an imam. So the reason we mention this is that regardless of whether he is the first or not of the of the sons of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, it does not make a difference. Imamah is not built on some principle that we come up with by ourselves, some conjectural principle. Imamah is a divine appointment. And it just so happened that in the case of the imamah of our imams, it just so happened that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to make them fathers and sons in this succession. Otherwise, even that would not be a condition for imamah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses whom He pleases for these roles. The mother of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is a woman whose name requires study too, and her personality requires further study. But again, going with the classic version of history that's accepted nowadays, her name would be Shahraban. And it's a story related in some books of history, who she was and how she got to be the mother of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. I wasn't thinking of going into the details, but very quickly, we're told that during the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab, or perhaps Uthman, we are told that the wars were ongoing between the Islamic world and the Persian Empire, and at one point, 3 women were brought back after one of the conquests in the Persian Empire, and those 3 women were brought into the place where the Khalifa was sitting. And there was a little bit of a back and forth between them, and the Khalifa was displeased with that. He considered that as a sign of disrespect to his status. So he kind of quickly dismissed them and said, just sell them as slaves in the market. And Imam Ali alayhi salam intervened. And he said, these people come from nobility, from the house of the king. So you cannot just take them and sell them in the market in that manner. And so this is in line with a principle in Islam that Islam never wants to degrade anyone for no reason. These are people who have come from a nobility, they're entering Islamic land, and there is no reason to treat them in a condescending way, in a humiliating way for no reason. And we need to take into account their background, where they come from, what they just went through, and so on and so forth. Imam Ali alayhi salam has a saying attributed to him where he says, show mercy to 3 people in 3 states or 3 situations. Show mercy to someone who was very wealthy and suddenly they are now in poverty. And show mercy to someone who is a scholar and who suddenly finds themselves amongst ignorance. And show mercy to someone who had a lofty status, someone who had izzah, who had might, who had an important status in society, and suddenly they find themselves in a very low position. And there's a whole psychology behind all of this that we're not going to get into, but this is in line with that. So Imam Ali alayhi salam tells him, don't do that. So Umar asks him, so what should I do? He tells him, let them choose. Let them choose whomever they wish to marry, and let them marry those people. So as we said, there were 3 women that the classic version of history tells us they were the daughters of Yazdajard III. At that time, the king or the Shah of Persia. So one of the women chose the son of Abu Bakr, Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. One of the women chose Abdullah ibn Umar. And the 3rd woman chose Husayn ibn Ali. And this is how Shahrabanu became the wife of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, and her son was Imam Ali ibn Husayn al-Sajjad alayhi salam. This is kind of the classic version of history as you would find it in the majority of the books if you read the biography of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. And there are a number of points that we can add here in addition to the one that we just mentioned about Islam not wanting to degrade people. Perhaps the most important of which is that from the beginning of Islam, the Holy Prophet was fighting the racism that existed and that tribal mentality that the Arabs had. The Arabs did not like to marry women who were non-Arabs. And they, even within that, they would choose very carefully from which tribes they would marry. And this was based entirely on a tribal mentality. We can call it today a very racist mentality. Even if they were to marry women that were non-Arabs, they would not have children from them. So this was considered a big no-no. And when Islam began, the Holy Prophet took a lot of steps to counter this, to change the mentalities, so that it's not entirely based on your tribal background or whether you're an Arab or not. It's based on your merit as a human being. Who are you? And so we see the Holy Prophet did this multiple times in his own biography with various companions, with various people who were close to him and women of that time. We're told, for instance, about the famous story that inshallah one day we'll have time to explore and study, the story between Zayd ibn Haritha and Zaynab bin Jahsh. She has the very lofty social status. He was a slave. And no matter what happens afterwards, in people's minds, he will remain a slave. Zayd ibn Haritha was raised by the Holy Prophet. He grew up in the house of the Prophet. He was a slave of Khadija, and he grew up in the house of the Holy Prophet. He was freed. And so the Holy Prophet wanted to marry him, and so he married him to the daughter of one of the chiefs of the tribes, Zaynab bin Jahsh. Same thing happened with another man, for instance, Juwaybir. Juwaybir was married to a woman by the name of Dhalfa bint Ubayd. She was known, she was an example for her beauty and for her social status. And if you read in the history, the description of Juwaybir, they literally say that he was, and I quote, one of the ugliest men of African descent living on the Safa. The Safa was kind of a stair right on the side of the mosque of the Holy Prophet, where basically people who were homeless, we would call them nowadays, lived. So basically he had nothing going for him. And the Holy Prophet married him to Dhalfa. And there are many such instances where the Holy Prophet would make these steps to make sure. There's a narration from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam in which he says, so that the Holy Prophet is trying to flatten this phenomenon of marital relationships. He's flattening it so that there's no more arrogance. One person thinking that they are higher and one person seeing themselves as lower. The Holy Prophet is flattening this. So you can look at that socially and you can look at that within the relationship. So that one of the spouses does not consider themselves higher than the other because of their background. They feel that they are in it based on their merit, their own merit as a human being. So in any case, we go back to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. We're told that his mother passes away a few days after giving birth to him. And the period referred to in fiqh as nifas. During this time, the few days after giving birth, she passes away. In his youth, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, he is born in the holy city of Medina. And he lives between 2 to 5 years with Imam Ali alayhi salam, who is then martyred at that time. And when Imam Ali alayhi salam is in Kufa, they actually move. He moves along with the rest of the family of Imam Ali alayhi salam. They all move to Kufa. And he remains there, and then he comes back to the city of Medina, and he has his father, he has his uncle, Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, for the next 10 years, and then he is martyred. So at that point, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is between 12, 15 years old. We're told already in his youth, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam delivered lectures or lessons in the mosque of the Holy Prophet in Medina. So this tells us of the kind of person that he was, and this attracted a lot of attention to him. Because at a very young age, he was teaching the Holy Quran, he was teaching the narrations of the Holy Prophet, and he was teaching fiqh, Islamic law, in the mosque of the Holy Prophet. So that would be considered kind of the center, the heart of the Islamic world. You can't just be anybody and sit there and teach. And at a very young age, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was performing that role. And this in part, by the way, based on what we said before, they say this is one of the reasons that there was a break with this old mentality of marrying within the Arabs or not. They say when people saw Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam being born to a non-Arab mother, the wife of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, they started thinking that maybe it's not so bad, that you can still have an amazing child. When they saw his intelligence and his moral character and so on and so forth, they started being a lot more open to the idea of having children from non-Arab women. And so that was influential, and this continued. If you read carefully the biographies of the Imams, you will see that many of them, and that deserves its own topic, inshallah, one day we talk about, you'll see that their mothers were all non-Arabs. The majority of the Imams, especially the second half of the series of the Imams. In any case, so we're told that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam grows up in the city of Medina, and then there is not a lot of mention of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. So I said that history needs to be studied more. This is one area where we need to wonder what happened to history. How come there is not really a lot of mention about Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam before, and there are chapters that seem to be missing? People like me are more of the opinion that history was tampered with. There are people who removed explicitly those chapters from history. And so we most likely will never know what really happened during those times. It deserves a lot more study. But there's a lot of gaps, a lot of silences there. And then we are told about the events of Karbala. So here there's kind of a short gap, and then as we said, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam is between 23 to 25, 26 years old. And the events of Karbala. There is not really any mention of him along the way or when they reach Karbala, except 2 or 3 references, and we'll talk about them. I think they're important to keep in mind because they may change your perception versus the general classic version of what you hear from the history about Karbala. The important point to keep in mind, without going to the historic details, the important point to keep in mind is, for sure, what we can be certain about is that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam did not participate on the fighting that took place on the 10th of Muharram. And here we need to add a detail, that if he had participated, he would have been killed. Because of his status, because of his relationship to Imam Husayn alayhi salam, because of the mentality of those who were fighting Imam Husayn alayhi salam, there is no way that they would have let Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam live after the events of Karbala. And I'm not going to go into the details now, but there were instances where they tried to kill him, including his Shimel, and others, they were about to kill Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, and his aunts came to his rescue, and in another case they considered him too sick, and they left him alone. So if the Imam had fought on the 10th of Muharram, for sure he would have been killed. So here there's a rational argument for this, and there's a historic argument for this. The rational argument is that, keeping in mind that we are talking about someone like Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. So we're saying that it's someone who doesn't sin, who doesn't commit sins, who doesn't make mistakes. So keeping that in mind, the rational argument is that if you are in the presence of an Imam and he is calling you and imploring you and asking you to support him and you fail to do so, then you have just committed a very grave cardinal sin. So there is no way that anyone who would be there on that day, who would consider themselves to be a righteous person, who would hear Imam Husayn alayhi salam calling again and again, saying, is there no one who will support us, who will come to our aid, and so on and so forth, and Imam Sajjad alayhi salam wouldn't do anything. So that's more the rational argument. And Imam Husayn alayhi salam himself makes that argument. He saw a number of people on the way to Karbala, and even in Karbala, all the way to the 9th, where he told them point blank, because the Imam knew that those people are not going to fight. So the Imam gave them an advice, a piece of advice. He did this with Ubaydullah ibn al-Harr al-Ju'fi. He did this with Harthama ibn Isa. He did this with other people that the Imam knew. They were seeing the Imam, they were talking to the Imam, they were polite and respectful, but the Imam knew that they're not going to fight. They're not going to join him. So the Imam told them if you are not going to join us, then turn your faces away and basically leave. Don't stay here. Because if there's anyone who will see our plight, and who will hear us asking for help, and who does not help us, God will throw them on their face in the ground of the hellfire. So this is more of the rational argument with which we can establish that for sure Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam did not fight, one, and two, that he could not fight, otherwise he would be included in a narration like this. Now we turn to the history. In history, the classic version is, we are told that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam was sick. And so there's a whole debate about what exactly was the nature of his sickness. What we can say for sure is that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam was very sick on the 10th of Muharram. If you want to rely on the sources of history, that's all you can say. We don't really have a lot of evidence, a lot of historic documents to rely on to see what happened to the Imam before or after. What we do know is that on the 10th of Muharram, the Imam was extremely sick, to the point where in the riwayat, he needs someone to help him sit. And he is oftentimes without consciousness. So Imam Husayn alayhi salam, when he comes to see him, he basically wakes up. And he is in the tents of the women because they need to be constantly taking care of him. And when he gets up, he is unable, as we will read, to carry a sword. And when he is lying down and he is trying to sit up, he asks his aunt Zaynul alayhi salam, in the last moments of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, before the Imam is about to depart and really enter into the battle after everybody has been killed, the Imam comes back and talks to Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam and talks to his sister Zaynab alayhi salam. And at that point, Imam al-Sajjad asks her to sit him up so that he can talk to Imam Husayn alayhi salam, which tells us that he can't even sit up by himself. So this is based on the history. The part that perhaps you haven't heard, and that requires a lot more study, is that most likely Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam actually participated in the battles of Karbala. He did not participate on the 10th of Muharram, but the battles in Karbala were not only on the 10th of Muharram. As we said, on the 3rd, the enemy armies started to arrive, and there were negotiations going on, and there were events that today in war and strategy, military strategy, we would refer to as skirmishes, smaller battles, smaller fights. And some of these are referred to as the battles of water. So on the 7th and 8th and 9th of Muharram, what was going on is you had people from the camp of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, because they no longer had any water, they would go and they would fight for water, and they would bring water back. And so some of these were led by different people. In one of them, Al-Abbas was the one who was leading these battles. In one of them, we are told that Ali ibn al-Husayn was leading the battles. And we have historic sources saying that Ali ibn al-Husayn was injured in the battles of the water and brought back to the tents of the women to be taken care of. And in another, we have a narration from Ibn Shahr Ashur. He talks about Imam Zaynul Abideen alayhi salam. He says that he did not fight on the 10th of Muharram because his father no longer allowed him to fight, and he was ill. So it's as though you have two reasons. And this is where perhaps, if you want to be a historian or you look into history more, you see that perhaps there's a hidden role of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam that we don't classically hear about. We only hear about the fact that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam was too ill, too sick to fight. Yes, there are versions of history that fully support that. We even have a narration from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, his son, who says that his father, Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, kana mab'un. And so this has more than one interpretation. There's something that had happened to his gut region. So it could be, an extreme form of dehydration and the fever and makes you lose consciousness and so on and so forth. And it could also be an injury to that area. It's not clear. Anyways, so we put that aside. This is just to add a little bit more of the historic details to all of this. And so you would have to go back to the books of Al-Khawarizmi and Ibn Mas'ud, Abu al-Faraj al-Asfahani. So this is where you see the details of what happened on the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th of Muharram. The Imam of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, very quickly. First of all, we have, what are the main proofs for his Imam? First of all, we have narrations from the Holy Prophet himself, including the one that we began the lecture with, where the Holy Prophet says that I will have a son by the name of Ali ibn al-Husayn, who will be the one called on the day of judgment, and he is considered the adornment or the beauty of the worshippers, Zaynul Abideen. So the Holy Prophet has narrations in which he mentions him, and he mentions him as the Imam. And in the listing of the names of the Imams, he is also mentioned. So we have that. A second proof for his imamah is that Imam Husayn alayhi salam, when we said that he left the city of Medina, one of the last people, if not the last person that he went to see was Salama. And when he visited Salama, he left all his important belongings with her, and he told her, my son will come to get them. So this becomes a sign, because that son needs to know that there's something left for him to come get. So it can only be the person that Imam Hussein knows to be the Imam who will succeed him. So that's another point to keep in mind. A third point to keep in mind is that if you go in the narrations, you see that Imam Hussein alayhi salam, in the last moments before he enters the last time the battle, he talks to Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam in multiple times. In one of them, he tells them, this is the hujjah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on you after me. In another one, he tells Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, when the Imam can no longer bear to hear what Imam Hussein alayhi salam is telling him, he asks about his uncle Al-Abbas, he asks about his brothers, and Imam Hussein alayhi salam, at the end, he tells him he's been killed, and so has been killed, and so has been killed. At the end, Imam Hussein alayhi salam tells him, there is no longer any man left in this camp except me and you. And then the narration, this is when we have Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, he gets up and he asks Zainab alayhi salam, he tells her, my aunt, bring me a cane and my sword. And so she tells him, what do you want to do with this? And he tells her, as for the cane, it is to stand on. And as for the sword, it is to fight and defend the woman left in this camp, the woman of my father. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam tells Zainab alayhi salam at that point, he tells her, hold him back, for he is the progeny of the Holy Prophet. He is what is left of the progeny of the Holy Prophet. Now, of course, the truth is, if you're relying purely on history, you see that there were many other people left on earth who were the progeny of the Holy Prophet. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam had sons. There were people from the progeny of the Prophet who could be considered still left there. But Imam Hussein is making a point to say, there is one line of the progeny that needs to remain intact, and that needs to remain preserved. And this is the engineering of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he cannot fight today. So he tells her, and this becomes an instruction to Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam to continue to defend and protect this man even afterwards. Imam Hussein alayhi salam telling her that this is the line that needs to continue, and through him. And Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, we are told he was already born, except that he was 2 to 3 years old, and he could not have performed that role in any acceptable, socially acceptable manner at that time. Okay? So, in any case, we keep all of this in mind. The events of Karbala happened. I'm not going to go into those details after the events of Karbala. The events immediately following the event of Karbala, I'm also going to skip over. Inshallah, in the nights of the 10th, 11th, 12th of Muharram, those are the nights where you hear about that part of the life of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, when you see that the people, the family of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam were taken as prisoners. And so he was taken as one of the prisoners of the family of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, along with the children and the woman. They were taken initially to Al-Kufa. And from the city of Kufa, they were taken to Damascus. And from Damascus, they end up coming back to Al-Madinah al-Munawwara. So So I'm skipping over the part where Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is taken along with the prisoners in Kufa and in Damascus, and where he delivered sermons and where he played a certain role. We leave that, inshallah. You will hear about it as we do every year. It's part of the traditional recounting of the events of Muharram. So what happens after that? The role of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, this is where it gets very important for us to understand his role. After the event of Karbala, we need to look at what happened, what was happening in the Islamic world. What kind of world did Imam Sajjad alayhi salam live in? And this allows us to better understand how he played his divine role as an Imam, and of course, for us to learn from that. The Imam did not play the same role, for instance, as you see Imam Ali alayhi salam playing for his Imam, or Imam Hassan alayhi salam playing in his Imam, or Imam Husayn alayhi salam playing in his Imam. He played a different role. And this is because of the reality of the circumstances with which he was faced. The quick narration of the events is that Bani Umayyah at that time, and we'll come back to some of the details, but very quickly, what Yazid did in his time, if he had any accomplishments, the crowns of his accomplishments, is that he killed Imam Husayn alayhi salam. And then he pillaged and completely destroyed and removed the sanctity of the city of Medina. And then he completely did the same thing to the city of Mecca. And then he leaves this world. It's as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want to have anyone left from the progeny of Muawiyah and Yazid right away after the events of Karbala. 3 years after, there was no mention left. That line was wiped off the face of the earth. And you compare that line to the line of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, those who are from the descendants, the Husayni Sayyid, who are basically the Sayyids from every Imam afterwards, who filled the earth in the millions. This is where you see the comparison. Which one actually lasted and which one did not. In any case, this is what immediately happened after the events of Karbala. This is the first step, this is the first chapter. And then, if we go in the years that followed, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, his Imam lasted 30 to 35 years. So from year 61 to year about 95, where he passes away, he is the Imam. During that time, if someone looks at Islamic history, if there's one way to describe it, you would say it's a world in crisis. The world of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is a world of a political crisis, of a financial crisis, and a crisis that we can lump together as being moral and religious and spiritual. The things that were happening during that time, it's difficult to imagine them, especially happening in places like Mecca and Medina, that are supposedly supposed to be the heart of the Islamic world, the center, the source, where you send the knowledge and the spirituality of Islam into the rest of the Islamic world. We're told that, of course, at the time of Bani Umayyah, you have Muawiyah imposes his son Yazid. One day, maybe inshallah, we'll have an opportunity to talk about the son of Yazid, who is also called Muawiyah. He was actually a very good man, and that's why he did not last. They killed him right away. And then there was an internal struggle in the family of Bani Umayyah between them on who is going to take the throne. And finally, the line of the family of Marwan ibn al-Hakam end up being victorious. And they are the ones who end up ruling, him and his sons and the sons of his sons. So sometimes that's referred to as Bani Marwan or Al-Marwaniyya. So he's creating another dynasty after Muawiyah within Bani Umayyah. So if you look at the manner, and this is an important point that perhaps yesterday we did not emphasize, although we asked a question and we maybe answered it indirectly. Why did Imam Husayn alayhi salam not fight during the time of Muawiyah openly? And then why did he move and fight with an open confrontation in the time of Yazid? And the short answer is that Yazid is someone who had perfected the art of tricking the people. So if Imam Husayn alayhi salam goes to fight someone like Muawiyah, Bani Umayyah would may be able to present this as a case of someone fighting an Islamic ruler. We've said in what type of ignorance the people of Sham lived. We cannot emphasize this point enough. And Muawiyah knew this and did this. He ensured that the propaganda worked only to his advantage in a way that brainwashes the people inhabiting at least the region that he rules over, which is Sham. He leaves instructions to Yazid, to his son Yazid. He tells him, there are people living in Medina, this is how you deal with them. There are people living in Iraq, this is how you deal with them. And there are the people living in Sham. And he tells them, these are your bitana. These are your close allies. These are the people you rely on. But watch what he says. He tells him, if you need to go to war, take them to war. So you can rely on them. They're trustworthy. He tells them, but do not stay a single day more than you need to outside of Sham. Don't have anyone from Sham remain one day outside of Sham if they don't need to, if it's not necessary. Why? Because Muawiyah knows that they're going to be exposed to a completely different reality than the one he is feeding the people of Sham. And that's why when Imam Ali alayhi salam died, and people asked how did he die, and it was said that he was hit on the head in the mosque, inside the mihrab, while praying, and the people of Sham said, well, why was he in a mosque? Why would Ali pray in a mosque? He doesn't pray. Does Ali pray? This is the propaganda that Muawiyah was inculcating and using in Sham. And that's why we said they did not even know that there is any other relatives to the Holy Prophet than Bani Umayyah. So this is the type of world that Muawiyah had created, but it's all based on trickery. He still presents himself as the legitimate ruler, and he acts based on an appearance. In front of the people, he acts based on Islam. The difference between him and Yazid is that Yazid was a lot more open in his corruption and his perversion. So now when Imam Husayn alayhi salam wants to move, it's a lot more black and white. And people will say it's clearly right against wrong. It's clearly the genuine shape and form of Islam against whatever this is supposed to be. But if you fast forward to now the time of Bani Marwan, who take over, there is no longer any need for this. They are so corrupt, they are so perverted, and they are so open in that corruption, they basically do as they please. And you would need lectures upon lectures to go through the atrocities that were happening during that time in the Islamic world. We're told, for instance, that in that time in Basra, under Ibn Ziyad and then Ziyad ibn Abi, we're told that there were gangs whose job it was to kidnap women in the middle of the day. They would just take the woman and go to an alley, and they would tell the woman, scream 3 times. And they would wait. If someone comes, they would release the woman. If anyone comes. If no one comes, they take the woman and they kidnap her. And this was open. You go back in the books of history, this is well documented. This is the kind of society it was. The kidnappers relied on the fact that no one would dare do anything or care. This was happening so much and so commonly. We're told that in the time of Al-Hajjaj al-Thaqafi of Bani Umayyah, you have Bani Marwan, and they put as one of their governors Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi. That man deserves lectures on his own of who he was and what he did. That man would get angry because he would see the people coming in the city of Medina, and they would walk around the grave of the Holy Prophet, and they would do the visitation, the ziyarah of the Holy Prophet. And he would get extremely angry. And he would say, what is wrong with these people? What a miserable bunch. They walk around useless sticks and a worthless carcass, as if this is going to do anything to them. If they want to do this kind of tawaf around anything, they should come to the palace of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, and they should do that. Don't they know that a man's representative, a man's khalifa, is more important than his messenger? And so basically he is saying that the Khalifa of God on earth is Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, and the messenger of God is the messenger. But a representative has a lot more role to play than someone who just brings you a message. So if they want to do anything, they should go do that. This is in the city of the Holy Prophet. This is in the city of Al-Madinah al-Munawwar. This is so that we understand what was happening. What kind of world was Imam al-Sajjad living with? What was happening to this religion at that time? What was left of Islam? We're told that in Al-Madinah al-Munawwara, the city of Al-Madinah al-Munawwara during that time, during the Imam of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, became the most famous place in the Islamic world for women to become singers and dancers. And that the Islamic scholars of that time, many of them were known to be very proficient in playing diverse musical instruments. This is what's happening in the city of the Holy Prophet. This city where every inch should remind the Muslims of, because of its symbology, because of what it represents, because of the history, because of the things that had happened there, it should represent people to people and should remind them that this is where the Holy Prophet did this, and this is where that other event happened, and fill them with spirituality. This is what had become of that city. And of course, if we keep moving in that line, in that direction, we have people like Al-Walid ibn Yazid ibn Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, who we don't have time to go through all of his calamities and how he would build pools made of wine so that he could swim while getting drunk. And so at one point he opens the Quran and he looks at it. He wants to use the Quran for fortune telling. And he opens the Quran and the verse that he gets basically is a threat to those who are obstinate tyrants. So he gets mad while drunk. So he throws the Quran and he starts shooting his arrows publicly for people to see, to the Holy Quran, destroying it and reading verses of poetry, speaking to the Quran, telling him, you threaten me as an obstinate tyrant. Here I am, an obstinate tyrant. When you will come, or if you come to your Lord on the day of judgment, tell him that Al-Walid destroyed me. So this person actually became the Khalifa of the Islamic world. This is Bani Marwan. This is the kind of world that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam was living in. So how does he counter this? Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam decided to do his confrontation in an indirect way. If he does anything directly, it does not work. He will either get killed or there will be a movement against him. So he starts working on educating the people in an indirect manner. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam starts to spread the teachings of Islam through prayers. And the accumulation of those prayers is what we call today a Sahifa Sajjadiyya. Instead of delivering sermons, the Imam would read invocations and prayers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they are filled with the Islamic teachings. He left the Treaty of Rights. The idea of a right, a social right, a legal right did not exist at that time. Today the whole world is based on the idea of rights and constitutions and so on and so forth. That did not exist at that time, 14 centuries ago. But the Imam left the Treaty of Rights. The Imam would teach the Holy Quran, and we are told that when he would go to Mecca, 1,000 reciters and scholars of the Quran would surround him and never leave him because they knew that he was teaching the Quran. He would go in the street and he would put his prayer mat and he would pray in public. And the reason is because the Imam knew that people did not know how to pray anymore, which is difficult to imagine in the city of Mecca and Medina. But you know what? One generation after the Holy Prophet, around maybe 25 years after the passing away of the Holy Prophet, we have a narration that says when Imam Ali alayhi salam went to Basra to fight the Battle of the Camel, the people there say when we saw and we prayed behind Imam Ali alayhi salam, his prayer reminded us of the prayer of the Holy Prophet. The people of Basra were not praying like the Holy Prophet prays. This was one generation. So if you can imagine after all of this, it's not that surprising to say that this is what the Imam was doing. He would recite the Quran in a loud voice so that people would hear and get attracted to it and start to want to learn it. So his work was always indirect. When he went to the city of Medina after the events of Karbala, him and Sayyidah Zaynab alayhi salam started to retell the events of Karbala. And this caused a lot of problems. And so they wrote and they told the governor, you need to remove Sayyidah Zaynab from there. She's working through the woman to spread the message of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. Imam al-Sajjad initially, he left the city of Medina and he started living outside. For 2 years he lived in a house. In the history it's referred to as a house made of hair, or basically the wool of animals. He lived outside the city. He stayed away from the normal people. He didn't want to be associated in any way to the political events of that day in order to continue to play his religious role and to protect the people as they needed to be protected. Very quickly, what happens after those events, the people start hearing about the atrocities that happened in the event of Karbala. There's a lot of tumult and commotion going on. Bani Umayyah try to embellish their image. So they call to the second generation of companions and the sons of the companions to go to Damascus, to go to Sham, to go visit Yazid to see that at the end of the day, he's really not that bad. And one of the people who went there was Abdullah ibn Hanbala. Abdullah ibn Hanbala was a very young companion, and his father was a great companion, and this is unanimous, a very great man. He went with his 8 sons to visit Yazid in Damascus from Medina. This is after Sayyidah Zaynab and Imam Sajjad alayhi salam have come back, and Yazid gives him a gift of 200,000. He comes back to the city of Medina and people tell him, so, what did you see and what is going on? And he tells them, I swear that if I only had myself and my sons, I think that it is obligatory upon me to fight this man, to fight Yazid. This is how corrupt and perverted he is. I swear that I fear that if I do not fight him, that Allah will stone us to death from the heavens as a punishment for not fighting this man. And so he is chosen at that time as the head of the Ansar, and they start working in the city of Medina, and the city of Medina decides to kick out all the people from Bani Umayyah. So there's about 1,000 people from Bani Umayyah in the city who are ruling over the city of Medina. The city of Medina uprises, there's a revolt against them. At that time, one of the people who is being pushed out is Marwan ibn al-Hakam. He has a very large family, he wants to escape. He doesn't want to be killed by this revolt against the Umayyadees. He doesn't know what to do and how to protect his family. He comes to Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. He tells him, I don't know where else to turn. Can I leave my family with you? This is the man who was sitting beside Ubaydullah ibn al-Walid ibn Utbah when Imam Husayn alayhi salam was called in the palace in Medina when the news came that Muawiyah died and Yazid is the new Khalifa. This is the man that when Imam Husayn told him, someone like me cannot pay allegiance in secret, why don't we wait until the morning? And the governor, Walid, said, okay, we will wait until the morning. Marwan said, don't let him go. Put a rope around him and force him to pay his allegiance or kill him right here. This is Marwan. Now he is coming to the son of Imam Husayn alayhi salam and telling him, can you take my family in and protect them? I want to escape. In the riwayat we are told that his family was made up of about 400 people. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam took them all in. And in the riwayat we are told that the women, when they were asked afterwards, they would say that we were dignified and respected in the home of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam more than we were in our own homes and our own palaces. You compare that with the behavior of Bani Umayyah with the family of the Holy Prophet. This is how you compare the behavior of Ahlul Bayt with the behavior of the others. After these events, they called Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam in. They forced him to come again and again. The Imam would not come. Yazid, after these events, he sent an army of about 8,000 soldiers at least, if not a lot more, under a commander by the name of Muslim ibn Uqbah, who was later referred to by those people as Musrif ibn Uqbah because of what he did. Yazid told him, you give the people of Medina 3 days to pay allegiance to us. If they do not, the city is yours to do with as you please. He gave them 3 days. The people of Medina were still in the revolt. The animals that they brought, that army, their animals, their horses and their camels were brought into the mosque of the Holy Prophet, which got filled with urine and excrements from the animals. And during 3 days, they pillaged the city. They destroyed everything they could. 1,000 illegitimate children were born in that year. No one knew who their parents were. 10,000 people or more were killed during that time. 700 of them companions of the Holy Prophet during those 3 days. That's the pillage that they did to the city of Medina. To the point where afterwards, they said, whoever is left, you come and pay allegiance to Yazid, that you are a pure slave to Yazid. You're not paying allegiance as a normal person. You now belong to Yazid or we kill you. And some of the companions, like Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, he escaped. He ran away and he wrote in secret to Salama, telling her, what do I do? And Salama wrote back to him, telling him, come back and pay allegiance. These people will kill all of your family if you don't. So they came back and they paid their allegiance. After those events, of course, they went to Mecca and they catapulted it and they tried to destroy it. They used rocks and fire and they tried to destroy the Kaaba. But if we stay in the city of Medina, so that we're running out of time, we stay in the city of Medina. Imam al-Sajjad was called a few times. The Imam initially refused. When he felt he no longer had a choice, Imam al-Sajjad comes in. The governor, according to everyone's expectations, is going to kill Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. When the Imam enters, instead of killing him, he gets up, he puts him in his own place, he embraces him and kisses him and tells him, whatever you want to give, you want to ask, I will give you. What do you want? So Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam doesn't ask anything for himself. He tells him he wants those people, his armies, to back off so that people can actually live. And he started asking for the immunity and the protection of the people and the respect of their belongings and their property. And afterwards they asked the governor, they told him, why didn't you kill him? And he said, I don't know what betook me, what happened to me when he entered. I actually feared him and I could only respect him. And of course they came to the Imam afterwards and they told him, why didn't he kill you? And he said, I recited a prayer. Allahumma rabb as-samawati wa ma adwal wa rabb al-ardeen wa ma aqlal. A very short prayer. And this is the reason why. But of course we know that that's not the reason why. It's because of who he is and his electrifying personality and the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to preserve him. The last component, and we will end with this very quickly, of the life of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam and the role that he played has to do with the events of Karbala. The events of Karbala were not going to last. Yes, the revolution of Imam Husayn alayhi salam was truly a reform and a transformation and basically brought back life into the Islamic world. But if you see the events that were happening afterwards, the event should have been killed in history. One of the main sources we have for the historicity, for the historic events of Ashura and Karbala, all come to us from Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. When the Imam, he would do this in different ways. For the next 35 years that he lived, every opportunity that he had to mention Imam Husayn and to cry, he did. And he did this publicly. We're told that in the city of Medina one day, he saw a man, he told him, where are you from? He said, I'm a foreigner, I'm a traveler. He tells him, are you not afraid to come to a city that is foreign to you? He tells him, no, I'm a Muslim and I'm in a Muslim land. He tells him, what if you die? Who will take care of you? And he tells him, if I die, I'm in Muslim land. The Muslims will take care of me. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam tells him, but my father, Imam Husayn alayhi salam, when he died, no one took care of him. And they left his body on the ground for 3 days. And no one did anything to that body. And they maltreated him. He would walk in the market and he would see the butchers. Right before slaughtering the animal, they would give it water. And he would stop and he would talk to the butcher and he would say, why are you giving it water? And the butchers would say, us butchers, we obey the commandments of this religion. And we never slaughter an animal without giving it enough water to drink. This is the Islamic etiquette. This is the Islamic law. He tells him then, why did my father, Al-Husayn alayhi salam, why was he killed without being allowed to drink any water? And when the people would come to Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam and they would say, why don't you ever stop crying and talking about Imam Husayn alayhi salam? He tells them, how can I do that when every time I look up, I look at the houses around me, the houses of Imam al-Hasan, of Imam al-Husayn, of Bani Aqil, they are all empty of their men. There are no men left in them. How can I not continue to cry? And in that time, those 35 years, the Imam would cry so much that some of the women of Bani Hashim, they went to the companions of the Holy Prophet, a few of the companions, one of them being Jabir ibn Abdullah. They went to him and they told him, we have a right over you, don't we? We are the house of the Holy Prophet. You need to help us. He said, of course, it's a great right. Just tell me what to do. Sukaynah, the daughter of Imam Husayn, the sister of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, she tells him, this is Ali ibn al-Husayn. This is the remainder of the household of the Holy Prophet. He does not stop crying. He mentions Imam al-Husayn day and night. He doesn't eat without mixing his food with tears. And he doesn't drink without mixing his drink with tears. He will kill himself in this way. Why don't you go talk to him? And so they would come and talk to Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, the companions. They would say to the Imam, this is the honor that Allah has given your household. This is not something strange for you that the men of your family are killed and that you are honored with martyrdom. Why do you cry? And Imam Sajjad alayhi salam says, yes, it is our great honor from Allah that our men are martyred and we are honored as a household to die in the sake of Allah. But it is not our honor that our women were taken prisoners from one place to another, from one palace to another. And every time I remember how my aunts and my sisters would run from one tent to another because of the fire and because of their fear, I choke on my tears. And this remained the state of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam for his 35 years. And at the end, the governor wrote to the Khalifa telling him he continues to cause commotion, he continues to mention the tragedy of Karbala, causing problems for us. And the Khalifa writes back saying, get rid of him, poison him. And Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was poisoned, and in his case the poison lasted many days in his body, and he suffered for many days until he passed away poisoned and martyred. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.